The sport of off-road racing is full of incredible stories, wild characters, legends, and even villains. We cover it all on offroadracer.com, but there's only so much we can put down in an article. Sometimes we have to dig a little deeper, and that means sitting down with some of our industry's most influential characters and hitting record. Welcome to the Off-Road Racer podcast, a Mad Media production, made exclusively for offroadracer.com. Each month, we'll go beyond the dirt into the homes, shops, and lives of the most interesting and game-changing icons of our sport. You'll hear about their history, success, failure, and everything in between as we pull back the curtain and reveal the stories of their lives. I'm your host, Matt Martelli, and this is the Off-Road Racer podcast. I'm Matt Martelli. This is the Off-Road Racer podcast. I'm here with Mr. Horsepower, Kevin Kroyer. What's up, Kevin?
Nothing, Matt. How are you?
I'm great, man.
Good.
Out here in Vegas, getting a little warm, though. But other than that, I'm good.
Yeah, welcome to the weather.
Yeah, exactly. You know, you and I have known each other for a long time, but for those people out there who really don't know you, how'd you get started in off-road racing?
So my dad was an off-road racer when I was a kid. In the late 60s, he ran his first Baja 500 in 68, won the Mint 400 overall back-to-back in 71 and 72. So he was quite the deal back in the day. And I guess I just grew up in the sport.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. What was that like growing up here? In that era was pretty epic. That was, factories were involved. You had a lot of big characters.
Yeah, so when I was younger, so when he won the Mint, I was 6 or 7 years old. The trophy was taller than me. And so I was a kid growing up in the sport, but didn't know too much about what was going on back then. It was later on in my life, after I got out of high school and got into my 20s, I actually took a job working for Walker Evans Racing as a prep mechanic. And that's when it was epic. I mean, it was Mickey Thompson Stadium Racing, and we were sponsored by Dodge, and there were Chevrolets, and there was Fords and Toyotas and all kinds of different stuff. And that was the era.
Yeah, I walked into off-roading in that era, and it was pretty spectacular. Well, I mean, for, a kid in his 20s, what was that like being on Walker's team? You're like with the cool guys.
Well, I thought it was cool. I'd worked a day job and prepped an off-road car that I tried to race that I had no talent driving, and finally realized if I wanted to do something in racing, I probably needed to get a job and get paid for it. So there was an ad in the paper, and I called down there, and the gal that answered the phone said, well, call back in a month because they're going to the Baja 1000, then they're going to Mickey Thompson over in Japan, and then the right people will be back. So I called back in a month or so and talked to Randy Anderson, and Randy said, well, come down and we'll talk. And so we talked, and he hired me. Walker came in. I got to meet Walker. That was pretty cool. And I mean, the rest is kind of the way it was. I thought it was a spectacular thing to be able to get a job in racing. What I realized is that they were hiring just about anybody that could hold an end wrench.
Right.
And then they were weeding people out if they didn't make it. I made it for 10 years and 3 days. And then Walker was retiring from racing, and so I moved up to Vegas and started the engine shop.
Oh, nice. Yeah, that era especially, it was like trial by fire because not only did you have to be, put in a tremendous amount of hours and be hardworking, but like the travel, right? Like, because it wasn't like now where there's, there's 6 desert races a year, whatever the schedule is, between short course and desert racing, and then, all the stuff that you had to do for the sponsors. I mean, and testing. I remember hearing stories about testing back then being, days and days of testing, not like, hey, we went out, checked the car out, it's okay, and then we went home. It was like some of the function testing you guys were doing was just incredible.
Well, the drive from Riverside up to Barstow to test was something that we did quite often for all the desert stuff. And then we had our own Mickey Thompson track that we had built out at Glen Helen. So we tested out there quite a bit. And it was back and forth between Mickey Thompson races and then desert racing, and it was HDRA, and it was Score and some of the other stuff. And then later on, when Mickey Thompson was winding down, we started going back east to do some of the soda / core stuff, and we also got it in the Craftsman Truck Series.
Yeah.
So at any given weekend, you might be at a NASCAR race, you might be at a soda race, you might be at a desert race, or maybe even both at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah, that's crazy. What were, was there a memory that stuck out that you're like, this is just classic, from that era?
Well, it's being in a NASCAR race in Richmond, trying to get in Walker's plane. He flew his plane himself. Get in Walker's plane and get our butts up to Crandon because we had to race the following day. We raced, I think, Thursday night at Richmond in the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series, and then we were racing Crandon the following days.
Yeah. The NASCAR truck series, like, that's an interesting story because a lot of people don't know that, that came from short course racers.
Yeah, I was off road. The story, if I remember it correctly, is that I think David Ashley was in a meeting at Ford, and the bigwigs were talking about, they're in Formula One for technology, and they're in drag racing for this kind of marketing, this kind of branding, and they're in NASCAR because they sell F-150s. And he said, what? And I said, yeah, we're in NASCAR racing because we sell F-150s. All the people drive pickup trucks. And he said, well, we should be racing pickup trucks. And that's kind of where the idea was born. There was 3 Fords and a Chevy put together. We ran the first exhibition race at Bakersfield. We went up, but we didn't have a truck. We built the first Dodge and started that winter with the Winter Series.
That's cool. Did you know, like, hey, we're like basically making history at this point?
We had no clue.
Yeah.
We had no clue. There was a lot of things that we did in my time at Walker Evans that we didn't know what kind of precedent we were setting. From engine programs to factory V10 trucks, we raced a V10 engine in the desert before they were even out in production.
Yeah.
Building 6 cylinders for Mickey Thompson to follow in the rules there, winning the Mickey Thompson Driver and Manufacturers Championship. The only manufacturer Dodge won it that year, 91. Every other year it was Toyota.
Yeah, it's interesting too because I was on a panel with one of the marketing people from Goodyear, and in the small talk, I said, hey, one of these days you guys ought to consider coming back to off road. And the woman looked at me and she goes, what do you mean coming back to off road? We've never been in off road. And I was like, okay, here's the history, right? I go, you have this incredible legacy in off road, and she didn't even know about it. She said that probably anybody at that company, because they cycled people through, didn't know about it. And Dodge, same thing. Like, to me, to this day, we were just talking about it the other day because I was looking at like, I want to build a pre-runner, and Dodge step side is what I want because that's what I saw as a kid, and that was to me the coolest truck.
Yeah, it was back. Now it's 12 or 13 years ago where we were able to hook up with some people in Mopar and some of the Dodge engineering folks that I knew through the NASCAR connection and get Brian Collins a Mopar sponsorship.
Nice.
And so we built a Dodge engine, put it in his trophy truck, and went out and ran some races for a couple of years.
Yeah, I remember that. Big Mopar branded truck. It was cool to see.
Yep.
Yeah, and so, what was that like in that era? You said you didn't really know, like, that you guys were making history, but I have real specific memories. Like, I remember how packed Jack Murphy Stadium was in particular in that era, and how people were just going completely bonkers, for Mickey Thompson. Talk a little bit about those times. You guys, like you were talking about, like, Mickey Thompson wasn't just a SoCal thing. It went to Canada. It went all over the U.S. It went to Japan. I think it did some Middle East trips too, right?
Yeah, I never traveled to Canada or Japan. Japan happened just before I started working there, and Canada started kind of after we were out of it.
Yeah.
But Southern California and up to Seattle and through the Midwest and stuff like that, and it was a tight show. They threw the green flag at a specific time, whether you were ready or not. So we'd take 2 trucks, 6 full bodies, 3 engines for each truck's transmissions, and you had 45 minutes between rounds to prep everything.
Yeah, that's crazy.
So it was wrenches flying.
Yeah.
And you got out there and did it, or you missed it.
Yeah. How cool to be able to live through that era and then start your own business. You start Kroyer Power, and obviously you've been massively successful in that powering. What are we up to in the championships? Is there a count?
I don't know. I think we've got 8 or 9 score championships and half a dozen or more best in the desert. And I think last year's win at the Baja 1000 was number 10 in 14 years.
That's great. That's incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah. So and then what was that transition like? So you leave Walker's and you start Kroyer Power and who are you, how did you do that? Who are your clients?
So I had the opportunity to move to Las Vegas and partner with Michael Gaughan, who owns the South Point Hotel and Casino. His son Brendan was getting into NASCAR racing. And when I was thinking about getting out of Walker's because he was retiring or semi-retiring from full-time racing, I had an opportunity to go east and help Dodge get back into NASCAR with a guy by the name of Joey Arrington. Or I had this opportunity to go build stuff for Brendan and his burgeoning NASCAR career, Winston West and that kind of stuff. And chose to move to Vegas. And instead of being in a corner in Brendan's shop, we opened the engine shop and started with just doing NASCAR stuff. So I kind of went away from the off-road stuff for a couple of years, and just through friends and people that I knew that needed things and were in Vegas and stuff like that, we started to do some stuff and got back into the off-road market. So we had off-road and NASCAR going on at the same time. In 2007, basically, the NASCAR stuff kind of went away. Brendan moved on to the Cup Series, and Mr. Gaughan shut down the race team, and we still had 14 people that were working on engines because we had a lot of off-road customers.
Yeah.
Racing against your dad is something that 90% of the racers in the world will never get.
I've accomplished everything I wanted to do, and now he's just like taking the reins. I want to be remembered for being a huge part of short course, not just racing, keeping it alive, helping it grow. If it comes down to the last weekend and I'm in it, the boys better watch out.
Yeah, and that's a very specific thing. People think that an engine's an engine, and it's totally not an engine. Especially with what we do with it, the demands that we put on an engine are totally unique. How did you, start to figure out that part of the engine builds and the business, and then, then the weak point, which is cool. You get the engine bulletproof, and now you have this thing called a transmission hooked to it that's gonna go at some point. So you got to manage all that.
Yeah. So it really kind of began back at Walker. So when I worked for Walker, I was a prep mechanic for a while, and they'd started an engine shop with a guy by the name of John Garrison, who worked for Keith Black for like 30 years. And John needed some help, and they rotated a couple of people through there to try and help him, and they rotated me in, and I just stayed. And after a while, John didn't want to be there anymore, so he left, and so we got the V10 program and we got the V6 programs, and we were building big blocks for Walker's trophy trucks and doing stuff, 7S motors for Rob McCachran and that kind of stuff, and all in the Walker Evans stable. The same application though, we had transmission problems, we had differential problems, we had steering box problems, and we just brought it all into house at Walker's.
Sure.
So when I left Walker's, I had left with that same mentality, that same we're going to do everything we can in our own building and see what we can do. And so we got into the engine business, we got into the NASCAR business. NASCAR's got a big rule book, so everything's pretty close to the same. So you're building the same stuff day after day after day. Off-road, unlimited off-road doesn't have that much of a rule book, and so you can be a little bit more creative and a little bit more inventive. But with that, you got to build a different kind of engine. It's got to run for a long time. It's got to run through the sand. It's got to run through the dirt. It's got to, run for 24 hours. I mean, we started them up in Ensenada and shut them off in La Paz.
Yeah.
And so when we started breaking transmissions, we had 2 different customers come to us on the same weekend. One had a GM sponsorship for their transmissions, and the other guy was getting them from a local builder down in Southern California, and they asked if we could put the same knowledge that we had in engines into the transmission program and see if we could finish some races. And so we took that program on, partnered with a company by the name of Gearworks, and we've been doing that now for almost 20 years.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting to me, too, just being an off-road nerd, like, understanding all the mechanics of it, of, like, how much of a specialty it is without, like, in particular with Gearworks, like, because of the loads that we're putting on the vehicles, diving in and out of holes under full acceleration. I mean, it's what we do to drivetrains is ridiculous. It's ridiculous that they can survive what we put them through. Like, I'm constantly looking at stuff going like, I don't understand why that didn't break. But
well, yeah, we've got some recorded data. It's pretty interesting. Down in San Felipe on some of the whoops going out Zoo Road back in the day, engine RPM plus or minus a couple of hundred RPM, doing about 80 miles an hour, 3/4 throttle up on top of the bumps. And we've got rear tires stopping and starting 4 times a second, 1,700 RPM differential speed to the engine.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah.
Like, how do you, like, that's the thing, again, to understand, you're talking about full stop of a tire rotation, right?
Yeah, it's losing 1,700 RPM from the engine speed, from the input shaft speed to the tire speed 4 times a second.
So the feedback that's going back into the driveline and the transmission, like, is
unbelievable.
Yeah, it's unparalleled,
yeah,
right?
It's unbelievable. I mean, the closest thing we've got to what we do is offshore power boats because they're flying in and out of the water. We're flying on and off the ground.
Yeah, no, that's a good analogy.
And their props hit the water. Our tires hit the dirt.
Yeah, and the dirt's a crazy variable too because of the the grip of the tire and the tire spin and all that kind of stuff. It's not like predictable like it is in pavement surfaces.
Well, and it's not 2 tires hitting exactly at the same time. Sometimes it's this tire, then that tire.
Yes.
Now with the all-wheel drive stuff, sometimes it's all 4 tires hitting at different times.
Yeah.
More than likely hitting at 4 different times.
And, just in the last few years, we've moved to big blocks, and that's brought the horsepower up. But, where do you think that stops? I mean, we still, compared to some other motorsports, we're still not using all the horsepower that can be made.
No, I mean, we had some big block stuff back in the day at Walker's when we ran Dodges. And there were some other guys that had some big blocks, and then the industry moved away because they were hard to package. They were hard to cool. They used a lot of fuel. And most of the vehicles were 2-wheel drive. And so you get a lot of wheel spin out of a big block powered 2-wheel drive truck. It's just with the recent move over to all-wheel drive stuff that big block power has become more popular. We did some big block stuff for Jason Voss, who built a truck back in 2017.
Yeah.
And it was a 2-wheel drive truck, but the tires are doing twice what the vehicle speed is doing in mile an hour. Vehicles moving 75, tires are doing 150.
That's crazy.
Yeah. But yeah, our big block program is not making all of that power that you could make if you really wanted to. It's still got to burn enough fuel or have enough fuel to go a couple hundred miles, and you still can't break the tires loose, even though you're less likely to in an all-wheel drive truck, and frankly, you still got to be able to run them for 24 hours.
Yeah, I think that too is the incredible part about this sport is that most other forms of racing, hey, they might be 15 minutes, they might even be a couple hours, but they're not 20 hours or 19 hours or 26 hours over some of the roughest terrain, and then variables, right? Like I was explaining to some of my guys, like being down near Chapala and having to run through a combination of silt and fog. It's like, I don't care what air filter you have, that's going to be terrible for everything on your truck, including your engine.
Yeah, we have dirt ingestion no matter what. I mean, it's just part of the business.
What do you, in terms of the engine power, what do you think the next evolution will be?
Well, I mean, we've already got some pretty successful all-wheel drive customers, and they're already scratching. They want more.
Yeah.
They could always use more.
Yeah, it's interesting too to see that evolution, and obviously with the 4-wheel drives, the weight of the truck has come up as well. So the horsepower to weight ratio has changed, and now with 4-wheel drives, you're also able to take advantage of more of the horsepower, i.e., more like a rally car, right?
Yeah, and I mean, as the drivers get more accustomed to the vehicle, I mean, the first time somebody steps in one of these all-wheel drive big block powered trucks, they're like, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
And then after they drive them for a couple of 3 or 4 races, it's like, okay, I could be faster here and faster there and faster somewhere else, and this is what we got to do to make it faster.
Right. Yeah, it's crazy to think about just in the last few years, and having ridden in those vehicles, and also comparing them to like a Pro 4, right? That just you can get on the power immediately coming out of corners, and it just puts you back in your seat. They're just rocket ships. It's really incredible.
Yeah, I mean, off-road racing's always been about bump to bump. I mean, who can get from here to there to the next obstacle the quickest?
Yeah.
I mean, we're still in a range where most off-road races are somewhere in the 60 mile an hour average. So you got to be really good from 40 to 80.
Yeah.
You don't spend a lot of time at 140, and you don't spend a lot of time at 10.
No, which is kind of, I think, the opposite of what people think the race is like, because they just see obviously all the cool fast shots, right? Not like the 0 to 30s, the 0 to 40s, on and on from all the technical stuff and going from corner to corner. So
Yeah, no, or it's a big jump shot or
Yeah.
something where the
sexy stuff.
the truck's a little wonky or whatever. But no, it's definitely a 40 to 80 mile an hour sport.
Yeah. No, that's really interesting. Yeah, so, you think, or that we can, number one, we can get more horsepower of the current big blocks that we have.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's the knock-on effect, though. It's so you get a package, you prove it, it seems to live, doesn't break parts. Down the line, you got different things like tire wear and fuel mileage and transmission components and drive shafts and all the other things. So you add a magic 100 horsepower to that. If you could, by flipping a switch or changing parts. And now what does it do to your gear ratios? What does it do to your tire life? What does it do to your fuel mileage? What does it do to those parts down the line that the predictive service life of?
Sure.
And is that going to last a race? And how much testing do you have to do before you implement that?
Yeah, it was an interesting thing just to see, especially, as people went to big blocks, to see that the rest of the drive lines fail and have to get upgraded. It's the yokes and the drive shafts, and then gearing and rear diffs and so on and so forth. And it's always really interesting of like, we start with something that's really meant for, we were just a few years ago, we were using transmissions that were meant for hot rods that were invented in the 60s, right?
Yep.
But we're, to your point, we are putting so much more stress on that transmission than, a street car can, that, you have to make bigger gears, and then you got to change the case to fit the gear in, and, and on and on. It's interesting. It's an interesting evolution to watch happen.
All right, Chase, number 23, it's 2023. This championship's yours. Let's show these guys what's up.
Easy, boys. It's not over yet. Big dog still gotta eat.
Whatever you say, big dog.
Seriously? These fools think I'm pride?
They know the deal.
Yeah, so, everything's based on a production part somewhere. Everything's been done before, whether it's in aircraft or motorsports or whatever. It's all been done before. We're just taking it to a different level, doing different things with it. Just here recently, the Gearworks side of the company came out with a new True 10 third member, and it was a ground-up build. There was no constraints whatsoever. It's how do we make the strongest gear set, and we made a new carrier for it and new bearings and all new stuff, and you have to run a different rear housing in order to do it. It's not retrofit into something that's already existing.
Right.
And so far, knock on wood, they've been really good.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one thing, too, that I love about this culture is that it has that mentality of like, you know what, doesn't exist, let's build it. Let's figure out how to build it, And that I think is totally cool because, again, we're really the only form of racing that's truly unlimited. We're only limited by our imagination.
Yeah, imagination and safety rules.
Yeah.
And every other form of motorsport I've ever been involved with has a super thick rule book.
Yeah.
And we can do just about whatever we want as long as we're safe and we can get to the finish line and figure out how to pay for it.
Yeah. Yeah. So, in doing this, you've supported a lot of racers. Is there a relationship that you have with a racer that, I guess you like or is special, or I don't want you to throw anybody under the bus, but like I'm sure you have some favorites.
It's funny because it depends on who you're working with and their team dynamic and your own team dynamic and stuff like that. We've had great relationships over the years. I mean, all the way back to Brian Collins and when Larry Ragland was driving with Brian Collins, I mean, they were wonderful to work with. And we did a stint with Menzies and that was good. And with Andy McMillan and now his cousins, Luke and Dan and Rob McCachran, I mean, we're lucky we get to work with these people.
Yeah. I know there's a comparison made at one point when we were talking between Luke and Rob being both like highly inquisitive drivers, because there's some drivers who are like, hey man, like I got a lot of stuff to worry about. I don't want to worry about this. Just make it work, and I don't necessarily need to understand the gear ratios and everything that's going on. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I know like Rob's not like that. Rob is so detail oriented and precise, and then I've watched Luke become that. Like one of the things I was really impressed with Luke is he hit this cusp where he wasn't winning, and he was braking and having a lot of DNFs, and I think it finally pissed him off, and he wanted to know why. He didn't want somebody to tell him why. He wanted to know and understand it. So he began this process of learning everything in the truck and then cataloging it, right? And I know even to this day he keeps a lot of his parts so that he can refer back to that part that failed, whatever, 3 years ago at the Mint or San Felipe or whatever the race was, right? And Rob's like definitely that way as well.
Their memories are ridiculous. I mean, they can tell you where they were, what they broke, and then why it broke.
Yeah.
They've figured it out since.
So does it make it special to you to have a relationship with a driver like that that's really giving you feedback?
It is. It's unique because you spend a lot of time explaining what you're doing or trying to figure out how to explain what you're doing and educating your drivers. But an educated driver is a better driver.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's got to feel good though too. Like when you have a relationship with a driver like that, you're giving him the package to succeed, because it's a very important, probably under valued, part of the truck, right? Everybody talks about the suspension, like that's what's sexy on a trophy truck, right? But man, the drivetrains are, probably take the most abuse.
Yeah, the drivetrain, I mean, in an off-road race, if you're going for a finish, you can change anything in the truck but the engine.
Yeah.
You can repair the engine, which is typically not the case, but everything else, you can put shocks and A-arms and tires and transmissions and stuff like that in them, but you can't change the engine.
Yeah.
So the engine is the one thing that's got to be there, and frankly, we all fail.
Yeah. I mean, that's the truth of our sport, is that everything will fail. Every part will fail, and if it doesn't, then you're not pushing it hard enough. And I don't really think that that's the case, in anything. Everything that I know of, whether it's a part or, a tire, an engine, a wheel, it's gotten better from those failures, right? And it's like the truth, right? Like ultimately you can talk all the bullshit you want, but on race day, whatever part is that you made for that vehicle, it's either going to succeed or it's going to fail. And that is the truth of, the pre-prep, the knowledge base, et cetera, that you put into it.
Well, and it goes all the way back to the vendors who you buy your stuff from, where they get their base materials from. And since COVID, it's been a real problem in our industry, in the aftermarket industry to begin with, but especially in the engine industry is getting quality parts again from quality vendors. We're not getting the same stuff that we got 4 years ago.
Yeah.
And so we spend a lot more time QCing a lot of this stuff or changing specs or remachining or frankly rejecting parts.
That's crazy. Like, what is that like when, and I've been around long enough to have seen these, like, you get a bad batch of gears that the hardening process wasn't done correctly, right? And then you'll see 3 or 4, clients have the same problem. What's that like for you?
It's ugly because A, you have to figure it out. B, once you do figure it out, you got to figure out why. And then you have to call all your customers and say, okay, we have an issue and we need to recall this because we don't want you to race on it.
Yeah.
And you got to deal with the money they already spent or the money that you've already spent buying the product. Then you got to try and work with your vendor to figure out how to get some of that back if you can, which typically you cannot. And then you got to resupply the industry.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just it's a crazy amount of variables both in your control and really outside of your control because you're trusting in these third parties that part is what they said it was.
Yeah, and I think we spend well over 60% of our labor just qualifying other people's stuff that we buy.
Yeah. Besides
fitting and making sure that it's right for our needs, but we got to qualify what they sell us.
Yeah. No, it's I just again I don't I don't think people understand the level of detail and the amount of work that goes into the engine packages that you're delivering to your racers.
Yeah, it's hard because it's got to be right.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter how long it takes. It's got to be right.
What is it like for one of the top guys right now, like a Luke, right? How many man hours are going into his engine package?
I'm afraid to total it all up, but it's well over 100.
Yeah.
It's well over 100 on a rebuild.
Yeah.
Between teardown, machine. If you're building new engines, it's worse than that.
Yeah.
I'll have 40 hours in block prep alone on a new engine.
Yeah, block prep.
Yeah, block prep.
That's crazy.
That's taking the casting as we buy it from a vendor and getting it ready to be put in service.
So Mitch, why is this bike so drippy?
It's our 23 race bike. We can start up front, work our way to the back. Bones can tell you about the suspension.
The rear shock is one of the most critical parts of the bike.
Pegs with the titanium mounts.
Kashima coating here.
Anti-gravity lightweight battery.
Young's Modulus.
Horse and a half.
Works Chassis Lab.
More tie than a space shuttle.
Really? I might need that repeated.
This thing slaps.
Slaps.
Oh, you should have told me that earlier.
It's funny because I was guilty of it too. Like before I, understood all this stuff, I just thought when somebody said, "Oh, it's a crate engine, it's a this or that," it's like, "Oh, it just magically shows up. You strap it in, and you just go racing." Or you might have to break it in, but it's that easy and simple. And boy, it's not.
No, it's not. I mean, even after the engine's built, it goes on to the engine dynamometer, and we run it for 2 days. It's 2 solid days of checking, leak checking, crank vacuum, checking filter screens, temperatures in and out. I mean, we're monitoring quite a few channels of data on that dyno. It's not just checking for power.
Yeah. Now we're getting to the point too where we're getting data back, and you've been one of the people who have led that, and that charge of I guess you call it going digital, right? And being able to see what's going on in the engine in real time and actually make adjustments electronically. Talk a little bit about that and where you think that that's going in the future.
Yeah, I think your tune-up should be right before you start the race. You shouldn't be making adjustments during the race unless you have some kind of a freakish problem. Mostly it's a data monitoring thing just to understand what could or might happen. And sensor failure, there's a lot of redundancy built in. So you'll have two cam sensors, 2 crank sensors, 2 TPS sensors. So any of that stuff that can fail, it's got an automatic swap over or an ability to hit a switch and swap it over. And you can do predictive failure on a lot of that stuff, almost like throwing a code in your car, having the dash light come on.
Well, what's that like? Kind of break that down. Like, so Rob Max racing the 1,000, he's got your engine package in it, and you can see the actual data as he's running. What are you looking for?
I mean, you're looking for all the basics, temps and pressures and that kind of stuff. It's getting more complicated as connection gets better. We did 3 or 4 years ago in Rob's 2-wheel drive truck, we did loop Baja 1000, and we had data coming out of the truck for all but 21 seconds. So we had multiple channels of live telemetry basically and truck tracking and that kind of stuff. And that was through an older satellite system. And then here comes Elon with the Starlink. And,
thank God, right?
Yeah, and now that data it's off the hook.
Yeah. No, it's pretty cool. I mean, soon we'll be able to share that data with viewers, and they'll be able to see, a lot of the data that's coming from the truck from all the different sensors in real time. I'm excited about that. But in that particular case, so let's say let's run down a scenario. Let's say that something's wrong with the engine. You think like, hey, this engine may be going because of whatever reason. Like, what do you do at that point? You just tell them like back off the engine a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on what you see. I mean, it could be something as simple as a burnt spark plug wire, or something as egregious as internal parts failure.
Right.
And so you make your decisions to do the best job to either get to the finish line or park it before you cost yourself too much money.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. It's kind of, again, like being able to have more data, and whether it's from the engine or like what we're starting to get into with tracking data and data back to the racers on position of other racers, right? It's going to really change how people race. They're going to be able to make, very quick decisions that, affect the outcome of the race.
Yeah, it's become a very intelligent game to go through these distances and know when you have to push or when you can back off and how big of a lead, or if you're catching somebody, or how far behind you are and what the pace is. Because there's guys now that used to run just fast enough to get the finish line and hope they got there first.
Yeah.
Now there's a whole group of guys that are on a mission.
Yeah.
And they're on a mission from the time the green flag drops.
Well, the chess game to me is what's really interesting, and Rob McCachran in particular is, the chess master, right? He's like one of these guys that, he puts himself in a position constantly where people aren't necessarily worried about him. He's there, right? And he keeps himself within striking distance so that when he gets in position, he can win, and doesn't, really show off and try and put big gaps on people. But, that was one of the other things like I noticed about you is, you're not one of these guys who's like, hey, here's your engine package, have a good day. You're out in the field chasing and, working with the guys.
Yeah, I mean, when I grew up, I wanted to be a racer. I wanted to be the guy who held the steering wheel, and I just didn't have no talent. So to be a racer, you got to be part of a race team, and so we're still, the philosophy was win the most races, make the most money. Unfortunately, that's not the way it goes, but you have the most fun being a racer.
Right. So you still love going down and being, and chasing and all that stuff.
Yeah, as you get older, you get a little less complacent with some of this stuff, and staying up all night at a Baja 1000 is not as much fun as it used to be, but
right.
It's still an adventure, and it's still worth it at the end of the day if you do well.
It's funny because I play this game with myself where I pretend like I don't care, right? And I'm like, I'm just going to go to sleep or whatever, and we'll see who wins. We'll wake up in the morning and see who wins. And I can usually sleep for about an hour. And as soon as I at all come to, then I'm like, I need to check on everybody, right?
Yeah, it's looking at the tracking.
Yeah, and then it's like you've only slept for an hour, right? So yeah, I love it. It's one thing I can't recommend more for people is to go have the experience chasing in Baja and doing especially a peninsula run point to point. It is a grind. You are gonna drive all night through the night. You're probably, if you do tip to tail, you're going to drive excess of 1,000 miles, which is a haul. But I could tell you from firsthand experience that is one of the most exciting things in the world, because you're tracking the race in real time at the race. No, it's like the whole world goes to sleep and nobody knows what's going on. And you're with a small group of people chasing these guys through the night, seeing what's going on, listening to the radio, listening to the weatherman, and looking at the tracking data, stopping at the pits. I love doing it. I love stopping at the other pits and seeing where people are positioned. It's super exciting.
Yeah, no, running a peninsula run is like a 24-hour plane crash, but it's the highest of highs and the lowest of lows.
Yeah.
And you're somewhere where you're getting a lot of information, and then you're dead silent for hours.
Yeah.
And that's changed just recently, but it's crazy to go into an area and realize you got guys that are doing really well, be stuck without communication for a couple of hours and realize that they've had issues and other guys are doing well.
How excited are you about this year's 1,000?
I'm confused. Let's put it that way. It's going to be logistically, it's going to be way different than anything I've been involved with before. And
Yes.
luckily, I'm not in charge of those logistics.
You're right.
Because I think it's going to be, a lot of people got to go most of the way down the peninsula and drive back. And I think that's going to take a lot of commitment from a lot of teams and a lot of money and a lot of effort.
Yeah. I think people are underestimating how difficult the reverse change makes it of us starting in La Paz and ending in Ensenada. It's not just like, hey, we're just turning it around. There's a lot of logistics that need to be figured out. Also time of day, and pre-running. Like, we've always been running this course one way, so you kind of have a feel where you should be at a certain time. And the good teams, they put together actual timetables, right? But yeah, I'm actually really excited about it and curious, and I know it's going to be one of these things that will probably take longer than normal, right?
Well, there's large areas down what's traditionally at the end, but now it's going to be the beginning where there's not a lot of chase access.
Now we're blacked out.
Yeah, so we're driving highway, race cars are driving on a race course, and typically it's towards the end of the race and it's not as many vehicles.
Yeah.
Now we're going to have a whole bunch of vehicles that are in that blacked out area.
Yeah, and it's technical too, going up over the mountains in Loreto and coming out at Guerrero Negro. That's a very technical area. That's an area you don't want to break down, and you don't want to have, any mistakes or failures.
Well, and if problems do arise early down there, and getting a chase vehicle in is going to be a problem, and then dealing with the rest of the race traffic, because a lot of the race traffic is still coming.
Yeah. Yeah, it's going to be interesting. You have any, and so with that, and this is my input or my feeling is, I think it's going to favor guys who have a higher level of experience in racecraft versus the guys who are just, they're fast guys, right?
Yeah, no, you're definitely going to have to think about it differently. And that's where the racecraft is going to come in, and your team is going to have to think about it differently, where you position your pits, your chase trucks, how many people you have going where, what resources you might be able to share with somebody else or not.
Yeah. No, I think it's going to be interesting. I'm excited to see it.
Yeah, it'll be different for sure.
Well, that was awesome. Hey, I really appreciate you coming and doing this, and I look forward to seeing you out chasing with us.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Thank you.